In this video, we're going to be discussing Rabbi Shabtai HaKohen, also known as the Shach. That is an acronym for the name of his book, which was called the Sifsei Kohen, which means the lips of the Kohen. That was his main book, and that's what he becomes well known for. So he becomes known as the Shach. He was born in 1622 in the city of Vilna. His father was a great rabbi in his own right, Rabbi Meir HaKohen, and this was his first teacher. Eventually, when he was about 12 years old, he already was very well learned, and he travels to the city of Krakow with his teacher, Rabbi Yehoshua, who was the author of a book called the Magine Shloimeh. Excuse me. And eventually, he learned by Rabbi Heschel, a rabbi named Rabbi Heschel, and a rabbi named Rabbi Naftali Katz. And eventually, he comes back to Vilna as a young man, and he gets married to the daughter of Rabbi Binyamin Wolf Tauber. And he is fully supported. He has everything that he needs, kind of his little mini golden age. And he joins the Beth Din of Vilna, the rabbinical court of Vilna, and he focuses on his studies. And he starts to write a book called the Sifsei Kohen, as we mentioned earlier. And in this book is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. And similar, we talked about previously the Taz. He writes glosses and comments on the Shulchan Aruch and bringing other opinions and debates about different the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, the Code of Jewish Law, and Rabbi Moshe Isser lists his glosses on it. He eventually writes in a young age, at the age of 24, he publishes this book. Okay, on the entire Yoreh De'ah. This is the section of Shulchan Aruch which we discussed previously. It talks about the laws of what is forbidden, what is permitted, laws of marriage, of marital life, etc., family life, and kosher laws and all that. And he writes an entire commentary on this. And he had an approbation from 18 of the greatest rabbis of his day. And eventually he, at the same time, about the same year, the Taz was published, and the Taz, Rabbi David HaLevi Saga, which we discussed in a previous video, which was much older and much more well known, and kind of overshadowed the Shach for a small period of time. Eventually, the Shach also became very well known, and to this day, the Shulchan Aruch, Yoreh De'ah, and Choshen Mishpat as well, which we'll talk about soon. Those sections of Shulchan Aruch which the Shach wrote his commentary on. The Taz is on the inner binding of the page, and the Shach is on the outer margin of the page surrounding the Shulchan Aruch, and that becomes the standard printing of the Shulchan Aruch until this day. Eventually, in the years Tach V'Tat, 1648 and 49, is when the Shach was still a very young man. Is when the Chmielnicki Pogroms came and they wiped out many Jewish communities throughout Eastern Europe. We discussed previous videos as well. And in this scenario, eventually these pogroms came to Vilna and they wiped out the city, and the Shach had to flee for his life. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little at the end of the video as well. He flees for his life and he runs to a few different cities. Eventually, he ends up in a city called, I forget the exact name, Illinois, I think it's pronounced. It's a city in today the Czech Republic, and that's where he passed away. He passes away at the age of 41. Till today, there is a synagogue called the Shach Synagogue in Illinois, in this city. It's not clear if he actually prayed there or not. Definitely was destroyed a couple times and rebuilt, so it's definitely not the original synagogue, but it's still there to this day, and his gravesite is there as well. He passed away very young after this very tragic ending to his story. But he did manage to write his commentary on Choshen Mishpat, which is probably his most amazing achievement. The Choshen Mishpat is, again, financial law and legal analysis, and his legal analysis is unreal. The Shach's brain, you could really see his mind and coming alive. He also wrote a book about his experiences and the experience of the Jewish community and the crimes committed against the Jewish community in the pogroms, and it's called Megillas Afa, which means the flying scroll, and really tragic, very tragic story of those years of 1648 and 49. He also wrote some slichos, lamentations, I guess you could call them, for the 20th day of Sivan, which is related to the pogroms that happened at those times of the Jewish communities. According to some opinions, almost over 300,000 Jews were murdered in just a couple of years. Very, very difficult time. So, of just a couple quick, before we get to some stories, with a few other of the books, he also wrote Chuvos. He wrote Responsa. He also wrote a book called Takfai Kayin, which means like grabbed by the Kayin or grasped by the Kayin. And this book was related to unresolved issues in the Talmud. The word that the Talmud uses for unresolved is teku, so kind of a play on that word, on those words. He also wrote a commentary on the Taz. We mentioned earlier, the Taz was kind of his contemporary who wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and they ended up being printed together. And the Taz, they had a difference of opinion, and like we said, the Taz was a lot older, so the Shach had an opportunity to respond to many of the Taz's comments, and he called his sefer on the Taz, he called it the Nekudas HaKesef, because in the verse in Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs, where it says Turei Zahav, it also says it finishes with, there's meaning the golden rose. It finishes with dots of silver, Nekudas HaKesef. So this was kind of his tribute to the Taz, saying that he was the golden rose and he was just the silver points. But his style is extremely sharp, arguing with the Shach. Arguing the Shach, arguing with the Taz in the Nekudas HaKesef. He'll say things like, he's stuttering, he very lengthy for no reason, very, very sharp style, but with a lot of respect. I think we did mention previously, it seems that they did meet at some point. At any rate, the Shach, he wrote, again, his main commentary was on Yerodea and Chosh Mishpat. He also, in his commentary, he'll quote a lot of times Sifri, which means my sefer, which it seems that he wrote a standalone book, meaning not comments, but just kind of his essays, very long kind of essays, and he quotes it. However, most of that book was lost for many generations. More recently, meaning in the past maybe 20 to 50 years, I don't know exactly when, they did discover some of that book, and some of it was published, but most of it has been lost. So when the Shach will sometimes quote and say, I already discussed this in my book, it does not exist. It's not extant. So that is important to know. He also, it could be that this is because of his running away for his life, that he lost that. It is not known exactly why those books never, even though it seems like they might have been published, why they did not survive. At any rate, he also had a tremendous. We could see in his slichos and his other books, we could see his how good he was at the Hebrew language. There's also evidence that he studied Kabbalah and was very well versed in Kabbalah, even though he did not write any books on Kabbalah. Again, he passed away at the age of 41, so it's hard to know. Maybe if he would have lived a little longer, he would have had time to write books on Kabbalah, but he did not. There's a couple stories that we'll mention. One interesting story is that when he was, when he was writing his book on Chosh Mishpat, on the legal ideas in Jewish law, that he was, concentrating very, very deeply on these ideas, and that sometimes people would see him walking on a roof, just pacing and pacing and trying to concentrate. And sometimes he would walk a few steps off the roof and he would walk back. And this was kind of the idea that that he was so involved and engrossed in his intellectual study that actually the nature of intellect is to bring someone up, is like to elevate somebody. So actually, he even though he would step off the roof without realizing it, he was such in deep concentration that he would kind of be a little bit flying. And anyways, those are one of the stories said about him. Another interesting story that I saw recently was that he was once ended up in a during his travels. He once ended up in a din Torah in a dispute with somebody over some financial matters. So he came before a rabbi, and he was unknown who he was at the time. Again, he was running for his life at certain points, following the pogroms of 1648 and 49. And he ended up in a town, and a regular community rabbi, adjudicated their case. And so the rabbi listens to one side, and then the Shach, Rabbi Shabtai HaKohen, gets his opportunity to present his side, and he starts to make these great, unbelievable legal arguments. And the rabbi was floored. Who is this rabbi? Who is this man who's giving these tremendous legal, scholarly arguments? And he says, "Listen, according to Jewish law, once I accept the case, I can't just say, you know what, I can't handle you, and relieve himself of the case." He says, "I have to accept your case. You clearly are smarter than me. You know more than me. But here's the thing. We just got this book arrived in town. It's called the Sifsei Kayin. And in the Sifsei Kayin, the halacha, the law, is exactly the opposite of what you said." And the Rabbi Shabtai HaKohen, who is obviously the author of this book, says, "Really? Let me see." He shows him, and he says, "Yeah, you're right." And he had seen there how a bias could affect somebody to the point that he can make the exact arguments against what he had written in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. There's another interesting story connected to the Chmielnicki pogroms. At some point, it's according to these stories that he had run for his life from Vilna with his young daughter. It seems that she was dehydrated or something like that in a forest, and she was left for dead. He thought she had passed away, and he was running for his life, and he could not stay with her or even bury her. So he runs for his life. But she actually had not passed away. She was just extremely ill. She was found by a king's by some sort of royal or king or duke or something like that, and she was taken into the palace. And she grew up together with a princess. Her name was Esther, by the way, the Shach's daughter. Her name was Esther. She grows up in this princess's house. Eventually, the princess, there was some sort of fire in the princess's home, and she runs for her life, and she gets lost in a forest. And it's a very long, drawn-out story, but she's captured by bandits. She escapes the bandits, and then eventually she is rescued by a man named Rabbi Munish. Reb Munish takes her in, and eventually, after his own wife passes away, he marries her. Later on, a visiting rabbi comes to town. Before we get to that, there was a decree against the Jewish people of that area, and she finds out that the princess of this princess that she had grown up with is actually the wife of this person who is trying to make this decree against the Jewish people. So she goes, she approaches her, she remembers her, and she's able to get the decree nullified. And based on this, she got the nickname of Queen Esther, just like her namesake Esther, had saved the Jewish people by approaching the king. Similarly, she was able to save the Jewish people. Eventually, a visiting rabbi comes to town and gives a speech, and she recognizes that this is in fact Rabbi Shabtai HaKohen, her own father, who thought she had passed away, and they are reunited. Eventually, this Rabbi Munish ended up helping publish. He was a wealthy man. He ended up helping to publish these books of the Shach, probably after he had passed away. So very, very fascinating story about the Shach and his daughter. And pretty much that is it. The story of the Shach. They go on and on about his intellectual prowess and how, till this day, his books are studied. And because, in fact, he is a little bit after the publishing of the Taz, his in general, we always go by the last opinion, because the last opinion has also seen the previous opinions. So we most of the time we will follow the Shach over the Taz. But until today, the Shach is studied in almost every edition of Shulchan Aruch. You'll have again the Taz and the Shach there, and of course his other books as well are also studied to this day. If you have any questions, comments, something I could have said, should have said, if I made a mistake, please let me know in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.